started, there wasn't many abstract animal or creature tutorials, and even now there are few. So I wanted to create some fantasy creature like this that will be helpful to the folks interested in this topic. We'll do a lot of things here, from basic modeling and how to use the modifiers. I will share a lot of tricks and shortcuts to speed up your workflow, working in non-destructive way as much as we can. We'll touch on some sculpting techniques. Once we model it, we'll do a lot of shading with the procedural materials. Not only that, we'll work with textures, and I will show you how we can skip the UV unwrapping, how to get some of the fine details that will push the final renders to the next level. Do some UV editing, how to do your own textures with ADDON, and how to use masks where you can draw on all channels like the metal, bump color and roughness, all these things. We'll do a few procedural animations with some of the body parts. On some of the animations we'll use the modifiers, others we'll make with the shader nodes. Do some final camera and rendering tricks. At the end, I will share a great color grading tutorial with DaVinci Resolve if you want to level up the post-processing of your renders. Everything created in this video you can do for free, and I will show websites and packs that you can use. The tutorial is not created for absolute beginners, so if you don't have any experience with Blender, you have to watch some tutorials that cover the basics. So with that being said, let's dive in. Let's start by doing the body. Grab the cube, add edge loop in edit mode so you can delete half of the cube. Use the mirror modifier to reflect what we have on the other side. Clipping on, this will hold everything together. Now we can work only on this side. Use the tilt key to switch between the views and start scaling and extruding the faces. Doing the main body part, and this here will be the butt. Working in 3D, always have to check it from different angles. Don't work it only from one view, as you will end up with something really strange. We can extrude here for the neck and do a few more tweaks to create and refine the head. I want the back legs to be part of this mesh, so I will subdivide these edges to make some space for them. Start extruding. You can follow me or create something different, that's up to you. The whole thing looks like chicken now, but we'll make it better. We can smooth out the mesh with subdivision modifier. Ctrl 3 is the shortcut for subdivision with 3 levels. Add edge loop to limit the subdivision effect here. Shade smooth, and let's put the same subdivision levels for the rendering. I want the front legs to be separated, so I will add a cube and extrude it a few times like that. Push some of the vertices to model the right shape. Changing the views and going to X-ray mode with Alt Z so we can select the mesh behind. Do something like this and add subdivision modifier. Additional edge loops wherever it needs and shade smooth. Mirror modifier with a body as mirror object. We can continue refining the shape. I'll edge crease some of the edges. Add a few more levels to the subdivision. So this is the base mesh we will work with, and I'll make it free to download. If you want to follow the tutorial and get the same results, you can grab this base mesh from Patreon and start from here. Usually when modeling something and we have reference images, we can use them as blueprints. We're not doing this at the moment, but if you want to work it like that, you can add the images of the model as references. Set the depth to front, reduce the opacity how much you want, and model on top of the images. I'll include in these images if that's the way you want to do it. But I'll provide you in this model because even if I have to recreate it, it will be different. So this is something to make sure we're on the same page. It's up to you if you want to use it or not. The next thing to do is add big horn on the head. And we can do it in the same way as the body with a mirror modifier. I will put it on place and touch the vertices. Edge crease some of the edges where need to be sharper or not so smoothed out by the subdivision. If you want to precise the creases and how much of it, you can do it from the side panel. The shortcut is N. I will leave it for now and grab the body to model the space around the horn. I'm using the knife tool to add some extra edges and a vertex so we can open the hole here where this thing is popping out. We can stick to the 4-quad topology wherever we can. So just like that we can extrude the edges and create this bump that holds the horn. Make it look like it's coming out of there. Push and pull the mesh to set it the way I want it. We can come back and adjust it later if needed. That's why it's nice to work in non-destructive way. And the next thing we can do is the mouth. Just insert and extrude this face, then snap it to the X-axis and delete the middle face. Add edge loop to open this part. With Ctrl B we can bevel the edges. I'll fill the gaps with F and main crease the whole faces to adjust the mesh there. To fill the space, I'll just duplicate the face, separate the selection from the P menu and extrude it. For the teeth we are using curves. Delete the first two vertices in edit mode and now we have the origin point at the end, which make it very easy to rotate. Put it where you need it and let's give it some depth. Fill the gaps to close both ends of the curve. With Alt S we can scale up and down the vertices volume. I want to thin out the teeth at the end, make them long with skinny tips. And it looks weird, but I like how it looks for this creature. Let's not forget about the resolution. We can control it from here. This one add more segments to the length of the curve. And the other one down, adding more segments to the depth. Now we just have to duplicate it several times and adjust the copies in edit mode. We have one of the sides, so just mirror them for the other side and set the mirror object. For the eyes I'm starting with a cube, extruding front and back face along normals, then scale them down, excluding the y-axis by holding shift. Add the subdivision modifier and set the levels right. I'll leave this one a little bit bigger and I'll use it to subtract from the head, doing the bed for the eyes first. With this selected, hold down Shift and select the body, then press Ctrl numpad minus for the boolean operation. This is a shortcut that will add the boolean modifier and do a few more things to optimize the object for a boolean operation. This is the Bool Tools add-on and you can enable it from preferences. If not, you have to do all these things manually. If it's getting hard to adjust it, you can reduce the subdivisions viewport levels to make the workflow smoother and not so laggy. Shade smooth, and here we have to auto shade smooth because we have sharp angles. This is the new shade smooth option, adding smooth modifier to the end of the modifier stack. I can now duplicate this part and let's bring back the viewport display to texture. This is because the boolean changed this to a bounce when we did the boolean operation. Mirror this to the other side and let's move on to the next thing. We can do the Mohawk next. So let's grab a plane and model it. Put it there next to the horn. We can use it as a starting position and see how it goes from there. Just extrude and rotate the edges along the head and down the neck. Keep it simple, only a few faces, and we will subdivide them. Same levels for viewport and rendering. Add edges where we want to limit that rounding effect. Let's also add a texture to the comp surface, deform the mesh with some pattern, using displace modifier. Make sure the scale is applied, and let's add a new texture to the modifier and adjust it from here. I'll go ahead with the wood texture. I think it works well in this case, but you can try in the other textures. So shade smooth and lower the strength so it's not so wild. Let's also change the coordinates to UV and unwrap everything in edit mode. This will help with the pattern. You can go to UV editing tab or just open one more window and change it to UV editor like that. If we go to edit mode, we can play with the UVs and do a better unwrapping. I'll pick one of the faces and align the vertices vertically and horizontally. Then select everything and with the face highlighted, unwrap it following the active quads. This will straighten the whole mesh and we can get a better texture presentation and the pattern looks much better. Your pattern might be slightly different and you can get some variations if you rotate it, scale or move the mesh like that. Let's also add thickness with the solidify modifier. Set the scale. I don't want to make it too thick, but I want the outside edge to be smooth. So I will reduce the subdivision levels. Duplicate it and put the copy after the solidify modifier, and this will round the profile of the edge. The texture here is too loud at the beginning, but we can smooth it out. We can limit the strength on different places with vertex groups, something like a mask that we can use to tell which zones to be affected or not. I'll grab this face and go to the data tab where we can add a new vertex group and assign the selection. You can do it with faces too. This will basically assign all the vertices in this face. We can use this group now that we created and connect it with the displace modifier. If this is on the wrong side, we can flip it from here. We can tweak further some of the things, but that's the way we did it. Let's make the antlers next. For this, I will make a small hole in the head. The same way we did the mouth, extrude in and get rid of the middle face. We will use the skin modifier, and for this we need a vertex to start with, so let's get one. Add the skin modifier for a volume, and to round the mesh, add the subdivision modifier. We can put it in place. Ctrl A is the shortcut for the scale of the vertices. With the skin modifier, we have additional smoothing option right here. And even if we shade how to smooth the mesh, it won't work, because we have to enable the smooth shading option of the skin modifier first. So do your thing with the antlers. If you won't follow what I'm doing, or come up with something different. Basically, we just extruding the vertices and scale them with Ctrl A. You can scale multiple vertices. The design of the antlers can be anything, but the idea is to add the Dreamcatcher in the middle, so we gotta do something around that holding it. Work it from different views. You can also enable the proportional editing to help you with the modeling. The shortcut is O. It can be used also in object mode, and it's a nice thing to have in the toolbox. If you get some artifacts, just scale up and down a little bit the mesh, or move slightly the vertices, and it will generate a better mesh. Sometimes you have to play a while to get it right. I want to add one more antlers, so I will just duplicate the first one, delete the vertices I don't need, and start extruding again. Scale up and down to wherever it needs. One more hole here just for fun. I want to add in some spikes to the legs, so I'll grab a tooth and adjust it in edit mode. We can change the bevel to profile to get this edgy appearance and make it look more aggressive. I'll add 3 of these here. Round back this one and extrude a few more times to connect it with the body. Do something like a pipe that is getting in there. We can move the cursor with shift and right click. One more object there. Insert the top face of the cylinder and grab the ring. Delete everything else. Bring back the origin to geometry. This is important for the next step. Let's add some thickness with the solidify modifier. Then bevel the edges with subdivision at the end. So here we want to snap it to the body, and this is the snapping tool, and we want to snap it to the center on faces and to align the rotation to target. We can just enable it and start snapping, but you always have to come back here to turn it on and off. What we can do instead is to leave that thing off and hold control only when we need the snapping. That's a shortcut and it's really handy. Bring the cursor to the world origin with Shift S and let's do a few more spikes. For this I'll change back the bevel to round, as I want this to be a little bit different. We'll do a bunch of short and thick ones here at the bottom. You already know how this goes, so I'll speed up the video. Make sure you check the resolution to look smooth without the edges. I want to add in a big one, so I'll insert and extrude here the face. Then duplicate one of these and scale it up. For the tails we are using curves again, but let's tweak the curves for this. Get rid of the mirror modifier and adjust the shape. Put it back in the center. Use the side panel to precise the location with the origin to geometry. So for this we want to extrude the geometry and make them flat. If it's the wrong side, rotate at 90 degrees. Ctrl T is a tilt shortcut. We just have to precise the depth and the extrude values. Then duplicate it. Open one more window to have more perspectives to work with and see better what we are doing. When modeling, it's always a good idea to repeat or duplicate the stuff wherever you can to save some time. Same thing for the back legs as we did the front, but these spikes we will make longer and thinner. Just a few on the back side of the legs, not too much, we don't want to go out with this. For the front I want to create something like armor, and the easiest way is to take the mesh from the body. Just duplicate a few faces and separate the selection with P. Remove the boolean modifier on this one. Let's add shrink wrap with the body as target. It will snap it and wrap the mesh around the object. We can add one more subdivision after the shrink wrap. The object uses the body subdivision count, so you gotta be sure you have enough subdivisions there. And if something doesn't look right, you can always check the subdivisions count. Add in some thickness with the solidify modifier, and let's go back to the mesh to get it right. We are using shrink wrap modifier, but it's always a good idea to keep the vertices close to the mesh to get a better result. Snap them from time to time to the body with Ctrl key. We already set it to snap to the faces. Use also the knife tool if needed to help you with the modeling. Shift E is a shortcut for edge creases. If you have some artifacts, you can tweak the mesh to get better one. For the head in front, we are doing something similar, part of helmet or whatever you want to call it. And it's the same thing, just duplicate a few faces and adjust the modifiers, then the mesh. Add the solidify modifier and do the final tweaks. We have here live boolean operation, and that can slow down the workflow. So just disable the boolean modifier or lower the subdivision levels. Can be only for viewport to help you with the performance. If you want it on the other side, we can flip the whole thing. Check if the origin point is in the center and press Ctrl M, then the axis you want to flip on. In this case is the X axis. We modeled everything for the creature, and now we can do the Dreamcatcher. The objects now are a mess, and it's nice if we put them in a few collections before we move on. This will make them easier to select and work with. I'll put them in a few groups, the teeth in one, then the different spike groups, the tail and the other parts in different collection. And we can put all these groups in the main collection. I'll label it creature. We will create the Dreamcatcher border in the same way as the ropes, and that's what we are doing now. I'll add a circle and scale it down a lot to 0.05. This will be the size of the strands. Apply the scale, that's important for the next modifier and not only. It's still in the creature collection, so let's move it on its own collection and hide the creature collection for now. Add the array modifier and change the count to how many strands you want to be. We want to rotate it around the center, and for this we need object, empty. Adjust the empty display size, but don't scale it with S because of different thing. With a right click menu, you're only adjusting the size. Go back to the array, change it to object offset and add the empty here. We can see now how the empty affects the circle position and rotation. Scale is also related. You can get great effects with this, but in most cases you want the scale to be applied to display the things correctly. To rotate it around the center, we have to offset the circle in edit mode so the origin point stays there. Rotate the empty 120 degrees on the Z-axis. If you need precise the position, let's add in the screw modifier. To make it work, we have to add some values to the screw height. I'll go with 0.5 and we can see already the structure of the rope. We can still precise it as it's not perfect yet. At the moment the strands look flattened, but we can tilt the circle in edit mode to fix that. 45 degrees on X or Y axis and now looks perfect. Collapse the modifiers as we have a few more to add. One more array, this time with constant offset. Get rid of the X and use the Z distance. To make it work, we have to copy the same values that we have for the screw. We have it right and we can merge it to get rid of the edge between. And sometimes it merges more than it have to, so check that out and touch the distance if you have to. So that's the rope base mesh, and we can add one more curve, snap the rope on it and use it to drive it. Can be path or Bezier curve. Let's add a few more segments to the curve, the rope to be smooth and not jaggy along the way. To connect them, add the curve modifier to the rope. Pick the curve as curve object and change the axis to reflect the screw modifier axis, Z. The last thing is to change the fit type of the last array to fit curve. Pick the curve and now we can easily move it to where we want it. Extrude, rotate and all these things. The curve is behind the mesh and this can make it hard to work with. Always have to switch to X-ray mode to select it. So if we select the curve, we can enable in-front viewport display, which will make it a lot more easier to select. Usually I pair this together and move only this object, but here we have some bug because something has happened with the screw modifier. It's not a problem because you only have to touch some of the settings and these artifacts are gone, but it's annoying if you have to do it all the time. So I just cleared the parents relationship with O2P and it's all good now. Just select them all three objects when moving because they have to share the same origin point location and rotation for this setup to work. One more thing to cover while we're still here on the screw modifier. Here we have the normal stop where we can flip this because they are often on the other side. We can enable the face orientation from here and see that is exactly the case. If we bring back the creature, we can see that everything is blue. Inside they are all red, and that's what we have to do with the rope. Just flip them from here. Do a Dreamcatcher base next, so I'll duplicate the rope, move it to its own collection and hide it for now. I'll add a circle for the Dreamcatcher border. I also want to precise the size from now, so I'll unhide the creature collection and adjust the scale to fit the antlers. Something like this. Apply the scale and reset the location with Alt-G. Few more segments to the circle and let's switch the curve object to the circle. Scale up or down to fit the end and the start of the array. And if the merge option doesn't work for this edge, we can add a weld modifier at the end of the modifier stack and tweak the distance to weld only that edge. The shape looks rough, but we can add the subdivision modifier to smooth it out. Same for the ropes. I also want to make these strands different, to be not so dense and more like branches rather than ropes. For this I'll go back to the screw modifier, make the segments longer to 1.5 meters, using the same values to the second array. Let's also make the branches thinner, just scale down the circle in edit mode. We can display the curve modifier in edit mode to see how the changes affect the mesh and see what we are doing. Bring this closer, rotate it if needed, and scale it to fit on the end. That's the border, and we can do what's inside next. We will start with a plane, rotate it 45 on Z, and delete the face, but only the face without the edges. Add the skin modifier, scale down with Ctrl A like we did with the antlers. Enable the smooth shading option and add subdivision modifier. Duplicate it and drop one in front of the skin modifier so we can bend the edges. I will subdivide a few times and go in edit mode. Subdivide the edges wherever I need more vertices, doing something like a leaf shape. We want to rotate it a few times around the center, so let's duplicate this empty and use it for the array. Just change the display mode to sphere, so we know which one we are using. Add the array modifier and put the empty there for the object offset. We need a few copies, but something is not right. Is the scale or the rotation on some of these objects. It looks like it's the empty, and if we open the side panel with N, we can see if something is wrong with the rotation or location. Apply the rotation to the leaf, so now we have it right and we can rotate it. Add how many copies? I'll do it 8. So now we set it on place and we can work on that thing, see how it goes everything and refine it. No worries if you do it the wrong way, as you can always come back and adjust it and do it right. I'll duplicate this edge next to connect it with the border. This part don't have root and the skin modifiers won't work. For this we have to select the vertex and mark it as root from the modifier menu. Subdivide to bend the wire and adjust it. The thing is a red, so we have to model it just once. I'll play with the vertices here at the end where the wires connect. Just pull some down and others up so they don't intersect with each other. It's a small thing, but sometimes the details make the difference. It really depends. For example, if you're rendering from a distance with a blur, nobody will see it, but if you are doing a close-up renders, it's good to play with the details, so it depends on the project and what you want to do. Let's add in a few more rings to hold the wires. Duplicate the leaf shape and make it circle with the loop tools. This is add-on that you can enable from preferences. Rotate it and scale it down. Put it around the border to hold the wire. Something like this, with a few more copies next to it, like it's wrapping around the border. On the other side as well. If you want to add some variations to each of these, we can separate them and apply the array modifier. We can now put them one by one, and tweak them individually to wrap around the border better. And again, it's up to you how much you want to push it and if you want to polish every little detail. It's almost done, so let's put it on its place. Select everything and move it in between the antlers. I will rotate it to match the antlers angle, something like this. Tweak and the antlers to wrap around that thing better. I want to precise the position now because we will tie them up with ropes, and if we want to move the Dreamcatcher later, we will have to adjust all the ropes that hold it. We can organize some of the objects to make them easier to work with and hide what we don't need. Let's connect these two, the antlers and the Dreamcatcher. The ropes are very thick, so we can fix that first. Just scale down the circle in edit mode and move it closer. Adjust and the screw height to something lower, matching with the new size. Copy paste to the array and we are ready to go. Be careful not to move some objects, they all have to be together. We can move them, but select all three objects at the same time because they have to stay with the same origin point position for the array and the curve modifiers to work. What I like to do here is to leave everything at the center and then adjust the vertices where I want them in edit mode. The other thing is how to duplicate them. So if you need more copies, you can just duplicate everything, then grab the vertices in edit mode and move the new rope wherever you need it. That's the easiest way I found, but if there is a better solution, drop it down in the comments, I'll be happy to know. So start wrapping the rope around the antlers, and if it's getting waggy, we can just disable the subdivision modifier. We can extrude, rotate the vertices like that, or even scale them. I'm trying to do something like knot and tie them up around the antlers. It takes some time, and I'm not gonna lie, it's not my favorite thing to do, but we gotta do it. The relief is that we can just mirror them on the other side. Add the mirror modifier only to the rope object. Duplicate the rope and do the other parts, add as much as you want it. I'll do 3 on each side. Don't want to go crazy with this. If you want to break the symmetry on some of the mirrored ropes, here is how you can do it. Remove that mirror modifier first, then duplicate the rope and the curve. With the curve selected, press Ctrl M and the axis you want to flip on to get it on the other side. Then switch the array and the curve modifier to connect with the new curve, and then you can tweak it as you want it. Next thing to do are the feathers. Starting with a cylinder, decrease the density of the mesh. I'll use it as the base of the feather, or that hard part in the middle. We'll hand them down, so scale down the vertices at the bottom, this will be the tip. Subdivision modifier and a few edge loops. Later we'll use them to bend it slightly. Add a plane. There are many ways to model feathers. We want to keep the things simple, so we're doing it like that with a plane. Create simple shape first, something that resembles leaf, and add subdivision. Mirror on the other side. A few more modifiers to complete it. Solidify for some thickness. Then one more subdivision at the end to get this round profile. Do a few more copies and just touch everything in edit mode. One more at the end and we can call this feather. To make it more realistic and interesting, we can add some variations to the mesh. Just apply the mirror modifiers, select everything and tweak it using the proportional editing. Rotate some parts. Push and pull on a few places. You can also enable connect only to work on specific objects only. Try not to cover that central part, make it visible on both sides. I will spend some time here. Put it on place and duplicate it a few more times. Do a few tweaks to the copies to make it look like they are different and not coming from the same thing. Let's connect them also to the Dreamcatcher. We can steal one of these rings and separate it. Rotate it and scale it down. The goal is to put it around the feather stem and have a few more of these. I'll leave some space for the wire that will drop now. In the same way, we just take a curve from the Dreamcatcher and adjust it. We can make something like a knot here, just to add up to the details. Bring back the other stuff and let's see how everything looks together. We are done with the modeling, so let's do some housekeeping and move to the shading part. We will do the final renders in cycles, but we'll work on the materials in UV, Material Preview mode. If your machine can handle it, it's always a good idea to have cycles window on the side to check how it goes everything. This won't be the case now, as the laptop I'm working for this video is not as good and it's getting laggy. So I have to work in UV and do the final cycles tweaks at the end. So we can still set the final render to cycles to check it from time to time. I will use the GPU and lower the samples for faster rendering. Let's see what we have in cycles. Actually need a light to see. Area light with more power and size. Let's also change the world settings to environment texture. This is where we can add an HDRI map. You can check Polyheaven, there you can download a lot of cool stuff for free. Drop the strength and we have the basic cycle setup. Before that, I can see here that the eye is gone in the material preview, and that's because we used the Ubuntu add-on. This is one of the things that does when optimizing the objects, so we can turn back some of these settings. We can start the shading with the body, doing the main parts first and continue with the small ones. We need a shader editor tab, we can add it here below. Do the color first. I'll go with something like body pinkish color. We don't need the material on these parts, so let's get rid of it. Here touch the roughness down. And add subsurface all the way up. Add a bump node with Shift A. we want to add some small variations to the surface, and we can do it with a bump node to the normal using different textures. In this case is Voronoi texture. Press Ctrl T to add the mappings. This shortcut is available if you enable Node Wrangler add-on from preferences, this thing right here. Use the object texture coordinates. In many cases they are better than generated, but depends on what you're doing. Connect everything like that and we can see the texture. Use a scale to make this holes smaller, and let's actually invert the bump so we have this like a bumps instead of holes. The strength here is important, put it down. The bump node don't work well with 1 or over. That's the base material and we can start adding some stuff to it to push it further. Let's mix it with one more material using the mix shader node. Grab a color ramp, noise texture and connect the mappings. Connect the stuff like that. I will change the noise texture to heteroterrain. That's where the Musgrave texture is now. Before was separated now Science Blender 4.2 is here. Move the color bars so we can see the pattern and adjust the texture. We can do constant for hard transition between the materials. I will do something like this. If you don't like the pattern, you can play with the mappings to get different variations. So that's the way the materials mixing with each other. Let's now create the other material. Add one more principal BSDF node to the second shader. Let's add a few more nodes for the base color and make something interesting there. Using the layer weight node, we can create nice gradient transition effect. Plug the facing. Make the material metallic. Duplicate the color ramp for more details. We can reset from here. We need this one for the roughness. And let's add some imperfections with the image texture. We can take textures from materials. We can go to ambient CG. I will look for a plastic material with some scratches. Grab this one, download in 2K. Then drag the roughness map and drop it here. Plug the mappings, then the texture to the color ramp. The best option for textures is UV, but we have to unwrap the mesh and it's not one of my favorite things. So we can just switch it to object and then change the texture to box projection. And if we add some blend, this will save us from the unwrapping UV nightmare. Something is still not right, and that's because we are using RGB color space. That is for the base color. If you're using the image for other inputs, we have to change it to non-color to project the texture correctly. Adjust the bars. The white color is maximum roughness and the black is maximum glossiness. Let's do more things here with the bump and add a few more small imperfections. That's easy way to make the things look more realistic by layering different details. This one is again with Voronoi texture. We can shift click on the nodes to isolate them and see better how they work. Push this bar to get to these separate particles. That's the base and we can add a noise texture to break the pattern. Have all these different small dents. Final tweaks, it's all about playing with the settings now to make it the way you want to look. Plug back the mix shader to see how everything is coming together. If this helps, you can always organize the nodes. You can separate the branches and put them in groups with Ctrl J. You can also label everything from the side panel. You can scale the nodes on different axes if you want to push it that far. And there are a lot more stuff that you can do with a Node Wrangler add-on enabled. Checking what we have in cycles from time to time. I will move to the front legs. add a new material and whatever color you like. I will do this light baby blue color. Subsurface all the way in and reduce the red values and add more blue. These 3 bars below represent the RGB values. Let's add in some imperfections to the roughness. We need a color ramp to control it. It's hard to find this for free, but here is a great pack with a few surface imperfections textures that you can use. Shout out to this guy for making this. Just drag and drop the texture you like, connect it to the mapping and the color ramp. We can isolate the color ramp with shift and click and see what we're dealing with. To make the things easier for us, let's just change to object and switch to box projection. I can see a repetition of the texture, so let's fix the scale. Here is a great example on how the box projection works. It's just projecting the texture from each 6 sides of the cube separately. That's why coming in the blend option, so we can mix and hide the transition between the edges. You can add more or less depending on what you have, but in most cases 0.2 or 0.3 is doing the job. You can also adjust the mappings, location and rotation to adjust the texture. We can see what we have and let's set the values of the color ramp right. Once you get used with it, the color ramps are a great way to adjust the textures. So it's a really nice way and save a lot of time if you want to use image texture but want to skip the unwrapping. More details to add. This one will be to the normals using bump node. Duplicate the whole thing and connect it. We have to invert it to get these dents. Lower the strength and let's tweak it to get to the right results. I want to add a pattern with a few small dots to this material, so let's mix it using the mix shader node. Voronoi texture to get a dots pattern with a distance output of the Voronoi. Using the object mappings, change the constant for the pattern transition type. We have the dots the way we want them, so let's connect and set the material there. I will copy paste the same color, but make this one metallic and put down the roughness a little bit. So we get this glitter-like effect. One more detail to add with another mix shader node. Copy paste the nodes wherever you can to save some time. We have it there, so why not? We'll do the same thing, but make the dots bigger this time, having just a few of them. I'll bring back the white color, something like this. And the last thing I want to do here is to add some emission. You might think that this is a metallic and it won't work with the emission, but this is abstracting and we can do whatever. The Mohawk is also a few mixed materials and we can start creating the base one. I want to have a gradient along the comp, so I will use a gradient texture with the UV coordinates. We already unwrapped this part for the displace modifier. Choose the colors and play with the bars to get it. Let's do something with the roughness. With a magic texture we can get a real nice pattern. I want to add this to the roughness, and we can use it for the metal input as well. Final touches to get all these settings right. I also want to make it transparent, and I don't know if it's physically correct with a metal and a transmission, but it looks okay. Let's add in more stuff. You already know how we mix in the materials. I want this pattern to be with a few curved lines, and the best for this is the wave texture, using the UVs. Check what we have with the shift click, and let's change it to the right axis. I'll play with the scale, add distortion, and get rid of the detail. A few more tweaks to do, but basically that's how we did this, and we can add the material for the lines. Let's make this vibrant color, something like neon pink. Lower the roughness and turn on the light with a little bit of emission. In the same way that we did the legs, we can add more details just by copy-paste nodes we already created, doing basically the same pattern but with variation in the size, or touch some other stuff, but the idea is to use what we already have, push it further. This will be the same pattern but a little bit bigger. Grab the horn next. Let's do some gradient transition first to make it slightly darker at the bottom. We have to set the gradient texture and see how the gradient is running. Isolate it and touch the mappings, the rotation, the bars position also. Add the colors. I'll keep it white at the top, pink in the middle and dark pink at the bottom. Bring the roughness down, but not all the way. Subsurface. Reduce the red values. Specular also all the way up. Add the details starting with the roughness. We'll use the noise texture here. Use the object coordinates. Isolate the color ramp to make it easier to adjust the noise texture. Continue with the normal details. Add a bump node and grab a color ramp with the image texture. If you want a texture that is already used, we can pick it from the drop down menu like that. Doing again with the object coordinates and the box projection. Lower the bump strength also and invert it. Touch the nodes to set the bump texture right. Last thing, I want to add more bump imperfections, but only to the bottom of the horn. Something like a grooves, don't know how exactly to call it, but we can get it with a wooden texture. So I'll go back to the ambient CG website and look for wooden textures. Can be this or that one. This looks better. Download in 2K. Usually we need normal maps for the bump, but we can grab the roughness map for example. You can use any image to drive these nodes, just have to set it right. That looks fine, we only have to rotate it. I'll turn it 90 degrees on some of the axes. Set the right scale and let's limit only to the bottom. We need more color ramps and mix these two with mix color node. Duplicate this one more time. Add the gradient for the transition and let's see where it is. Rotate it so the black part stays down and play with the color ramps to leave how much of the bump you need. Plug back in the principal BSDF to see what we created. We have to invert the bump on this one to have them grave it in the bone. I think that looks okay and we can always play with it. Do it later, for now we can jump to the antlers. I will go straight to the pattern with a wave texture. Do it green, but add one more dark green for contrast. Check the scale. Add distortion to shake a little bit these lines. Detail low to smooth them out. Lower the roughness and add subsurface. We can use the same setup for the normal. So grab the bump node, then duplicate the color ramp. Back to the default and plug it there. Something around 2.3 bump strength and duplicate it to add more details. Plug normal to normal, and that's how we can use multiple layers of normal maps. Here I'll use again the wave texture, but make the pattern smaller. I also want to mix it with a noise texture. We can do it here between the mappings and the coordinates with a mix core node. Just like that, and plug the noise there. So with this factor now we have the noise texture on 1 and the wave texture on 0. And we have to pick some nice spot between these two textures and how they're mixing. The second bump here can be with a lower strength. Move on to the last part of this material. We will do only the bottom part of the antlers and we will mix the materials again with a mix shader node. Using the gradient texture to set the way these two materials will mix. Isolate the nodes and set the way this gradient is running. Something like this look fine. We can change the color ramp to B-spline for softer transition between the materials. For the other material, I'll make it metallic and reduce the roughness slightly. Two types of details we will add here. One is with the normal, so grab the bump node and a wave texture. The other thing are the dots. We already created this setup with a Voronoi texture, so we can go back to the legs and just control C the nodes we want. Paste them here, connect them and adjust the nodes. Attend the material for the pattern. Pick the color. I'll make it metallic and lower the roughness. The other pair will be simple. We will make the surface rough with one of the textures to the normal only. So we will keep the white color and make it glossy. Grab the nodes we need using the Voronoi texture. Edit the scale. Reduce the strength and we are done with it. We made the skin in the same way, but there we inverted the bump. Now we will leave it the way it is. Very simple material for the eyes also, with only black color. Make them shine, and if we go down to the specular, we can level up to enhance that. This part is the same as the body, and we can make it different. We can copy some of these nodes to the new material we will create now. We have a live boolean operation, but we can add the material to the cutting object. Then add additional slot and use the same material on the other object. This will make the connection between these two materials, and we can keep the boolean, we don't have to apply it, so we can get to these faces and assign the material there. The next simple material are the teeth. Roughness down, specular up. We can add a noise texture to the roughness to add some variations there. You can copy the settings I'm using or tweak the texture the way you want it and link the material to the other objects from this collection. For final touch, we can make the space around the corners darker or something like a shadow where the mesh intersect. For this we need a color ramp and an ambient occlusion node connected to the base color and to the bars. You can mute nodes with M to see how it looks with and without them. I'll leave them like that and move to the armor thing. We can start with the base color, adding a few nodes with a noise texture to create slight variation to the colors, using the mix color node. A, B are the two colors, and with the color ramp we can adjust how they're mixing. This of course metallic, and let's grab the bump node to create some dents and imperfections to the surface. Starting with a Voronoi texture to create a base structure. Use the color ramp to grab only a few of these. I'll invert it to create something like scratches. One more texture we need to make this pattern more interesting, and we can plug the noise texture like that to the location. And now it's only a play with the settings. You can get so many different results from here, and it's all about how you want it. Another easy one, we'll do some stuff to the spikes later, but we can add some imperfections now to the normal. Using one of the surface imperfections textures we downloaded earlier. Do the UV stride with the box projection and the blending. That one we can link. Apply the scale if the texture doesn't match. And here you can see what's happened when you forget to apply the scale. Now I have to adjust the modifiers. If you want to adjust only this object pattern, you can separate the material and work it out. Not a lot of details to this spike. It's only a core for now, with a touch of the roughness and the subsurface. Duplicate this one and change the color to save some time. I'll link the teeth material to the other spikes on the front and the back legs. Do the same here for the armor. Make the tail parts different colors. Let's copy some. We can Ctrl C and steal different nodes or colors from the other materials. I'll make simple wavy pattern for this material with a wave texture. Copy paste more stuff. Use the same node setup for the Musgrave texture here. So just like that, when we created something, we can use it to create more stuff with it. We set all the materials for the creature, and let's do the Dreamcatcher now. Starting with a base border, I want to make something that looks like branches, and we can use the wave texture to create the grooves. We need to use the UVs on this one, and let's change it to the right axis. Just like that, with the right scale and a little bit of distortion, we have something that we can use. Let's do some tweaks to the color ramp to see how it goes, I think. Maybe tweak the settings here, will give us a better idea what we're doing. So take your time, and when you're happy with it, add the colors. I'll use light and dark brown. Do some space for the bump. We want the same effect into the normal to add some depth of the surface of the branches. Plug it to the head of the bump. Do the strength and invert if needed. Duplicate all these nodes to push the detail further. Using the same texture setup, just make the one smaller and the other one bigger. You can also play with more of the settings to make it different. Check also the roughness. We can always add more textures here to make it more realistic, but I think we're good to go for this one. The small ropes are also simple, just a few nodes to make some surface variations. Using the noise texture here to the roughness. We want to squash this down on one or two of the axes only, but not all of them, to get to these stretches. Then we can pump it into the normal to get this rough texture. Do the big ropes next. We have a nice rope texture we can download from Ambient CG. Ctrl Shift T with the principal BSDF selected, and we can choose which textures to add. This is another not linear shortcut, and you have to enable this add-on to do it. Connect everything the way it should, like you can see. The texture looks great, even if it's not unwrapped yet. And if we scale down the texture, we can get it better. The strengths are usually on diagonal, and we can play with the rotation to fix that. And it's almost perfect now, so we can leave it like that and move on to the next thing. But if you want to do a proper unwrapping, there are a few more things you have to do. First thing is to apply the screw modifier, so we can work with the mesh. We can't do that on the curves. We started with a curved circle, so we can't apply the screw modifier at the moment. We have to apply all the modifiers. But if we convert everything, we won't be able to edit the rope anymore, and we want to keep it non-destructive. So we can duplicate the circle, get rid of all the modifiers like that. I'll also check the resolution and lower it to 2 or 3, so we have less geometry to deal with on the UVs. Convert now this to mesh the way it is, without any modifiers. Then I'll go back to the original and link back all the modifiers. I'll link also in the material. And let's see what we did. We still can't apply the screw modifier here, but on the copy with the converted circle we can. Ctrl A is the shortcut to apply the modifiers. As you can see now, we can tap into the geometry in edit mode. And we can still edit the curve and adjust the rope if needed, which is exactly what we wanted. Let's now unwrap this thing. We have to add a seam first. I want to hide the seam inside so it's not visible where is the edge. Double click to grab that edge loop right there inside. I'll mark it as a seam with a right click menu. Bring back the UV editing window. Select everything in edit mode and unwrap it. That's what we have now. As you can see, that's not bad, but it looks a little bit deformed and we can fix that. We can choose one of these faces and align the vertices horizontally and vertically. Then select everything, and with that faces highlighted, unwrap it again, following the active quotes to straighten everything. Almost the same as before, so it's up to you if you want to do it or not. Something else we can do here is to precise the scale like that. We can also rotate the mesh if we want different angles, but with this texture we can leave it the way it is, as it's okay with the diagonal lines. I will leave it the way it is and we will link the material to the other objects. The last material is for the feathers. I'll do the strauss white color and make them more reflective. For the other part, it's a simple wave texture pattern. Using the UV coordinates, this will create these creases that imitate the flow of the hair strands. We don't have to do much here, just set the color ramp right. Add also the bump node and have the same texture plug it to the normal. We can isolate the bump and do the grooves. The only thing left is to add some colors. Can be any variations, light and dark tones, to enhance these grooves we just did. Time to do some renderings to see what we have and what we have to improve. I'll add a plane for the background and level all the objects. Add a subdivision with edge loop and smooth it out. Ctrl Alt numpad 0 to snap the camera to the view. Then shift and tilt to move it around with the WASD keys. Drive it like it's a video game. Use the mouse wheel if you want to control the speed. Touch a few more things. Attend the camera passepartout to see only what's inside the frame. Put the camera here on the side. I'll open another window for it. Check what we have in cycles, and we have to adjust the light. I'll make this one bigger and increase the power. One more light in front, 2 lights for now, later we can update this. Go to the render properties to set the color profile. We are on the AGX profile, but let's do the punchy look. It will make it a little bit darker, but we can add more power to the lights. F2 to render and see how it looks, I think. It's always better to do renders with a high resolution, like 4K for example. Then you can zoom in and really see all the details. If we try to zoom in now, it's getting blurry and pixelated, but for the test results it's okay with a 2K resolution. I can see a few things that can be updated, starting with the body material. We can make it more realistic by adding a few more nodes. I want to tap into the pinky skin setup and do a few more variations to the roughness using the noise texture. If we duplicate what we just did and add mix color node, we can make the base color more interesting, add some variations there. Copy paste the color and use the mouse wheel to make one of the colors darker or lighter. Only want to add a few fine details here that are barely seen. Touch the node and do a different texture size here. We can also draw some stuff. Let's try that next. The sad thing is that we have to convert some of the objects to mesh so we can unwrap them. Before that, I want to copy everything and move it to a backup folder in case I need the non-destructive mesh later on. Let's grab the object we want to paint on and convert it to mesh first. We can do the lazy unwrapping, smart UV projection with a little bit of margin. If we change to UV here, we can see how this both spikes was unwrapped. Here on the side panel is the add-on UCUPIANT. It's a free add-on, you need to download it first. You can drag and drop it to the preferences, get extension tab. So once we download it and enable it, we can click here to generate the node setup. Pick the channels we want. This will add node 3 with the main channels we have, so we can still edit them from here. But the part starts when we go to the layers. We can open or add new images, adjust the size as you want it. Then if we go to texture paint mode, we can start drawing on this. Here the colors we have, we can choose two to swap between from here. And just like that, we can add different colors to the base layer. And this is fine, but what I want to show you are the layers with masks, as there we can do a few more things. So go ahead and pick this one with image mask. Let's double it. Do the white color here. Mask work with black and white. With the X we can swap between these two colors. With the white color we are adding, and with the black color we are removing or taking back from the mask. And just like that we can paint the thing we want. I'm using the F key to adjust the brush size and Shift F to adjust the strength. Now here is the cool thing. We can actually tap into the channel of the thing we are painting. And these are the channels we can enable and work with. Let's say we want this metallic, we can enable it from here. And we still have control of the original channel separately. We can still edit everything from here. To delete this, I'm holding Ctrl to swap with a black brush. I'll add some text and play with the channels to get what I want. We can use the same layer to add more details, default brush, or add different textures. From here we can add the textures and adjust them. We can use procedural textures or import image textures. Not a lot of free options out there, but here is a great grand texture pack that we can use. You can check this out and download from Gumroad. Bring back the brush to the default stroke method. If still don't work, check here the texture, and if it's not available, that's because we have transparency in the image. We can fix that by enabling the color ramp, and we can see it already. If we draw now to test it, the brush works fine with the texture. So we can work on like that, or we can change the brush method if you want to have better control of the texture and how to draw it. We have to go back to the tool panel in texture paint mode and change the mapping to stencil. Now we can see the image on the screen and we can use the right click to move it around, control right click to rotate it and shift right click to zoom it. That's how you can choose parts of the texture and draw it to the object. Let's pick a few small dents and draw them with a brush. This will be like an extra layer of details. And we can push it even more by adding more stuff to it. We can do a few strokes on the edge to make it look like more on edges. I'll change the texture with something else from this or the other pack. I'll also change back the mapping to view plane and do a few scratches with a brush. Just on the edges like that. Shift F to control the strength. I'm not doing perfectly, but that's how we can easily add a lot of details to the object. And that's only one layer. We can add multiple layers, and the mask layers are great because they can be adjusted wherever you want. Let's push it even more with another layer. We can use also the normal. If the normal is not available, you can add a channel from here. Once you have it, you can enable it down here and use wherever you paint, like a bump node. You can get rid of the color and leave it only as a scratches. Do a few more of these. Hold down Ctrl key to take out some. And we have 3 fast scratches. That was just a quick overview of this add-on, and it's a crazy what you can do with it, so check it out. A few more things we can do with it here, but let's first convert the curve to mesh. The easiest way is to use Smart UV Project, and in this case it's doing a decent job with unwrapping. You can see here how the margin is adding a little bit of space between the edge and the islands. Let's activate the node setup. I'll go straight to the layers with a mask, switch to the texture paint mode and start drawing some stuff. On this one, it's just a simple wave texture with a bump to the normal to make a few curves along the path with the UV texture coordinates. I want to cut in the tails to the body and leave some space around them. We will use the booleans, but we gotta be sure the tails don't intersect with each other, as this will break up the boolean. Do a few tweaks and leave enough space. Convert the curves to mesh. Then in edit mode we can select everything with A and scale it up with Alt S. If their caps are flying away, do the merge by distance to have the edges there. And if the size looks different, make sure the scale is applied to scale up the tails evenly. Again, make sure they don't intersect. Then join them with Ctrl J and cut them out with Ctrl numpad minus if you have the boolean to add on. I want to make these parts the same color as the tails, so we just have to add these materials to the body to make the connection. Grab this part next and let's add more details with the UCUPIANT add-on. We have to separate it as a new material. Fix the nodes setup from here. You don't need these nodes. Convert the things you want to paint onto mesh. Same as before, we draw some pattern here and play with the settings. You can also delete this thing and add emission channel. Activate it below. Let's do a few stuff here, just a few lines. Maybe activate the normal channel. Can be positive or negative, we can touch that here. Change colors and everything. The masks are a nice thing to work with. Paint also something with the armor, starting with the head part, the mini helmet. I want to add just a few lines in different colors and I'll use different mask layers again. But be careful with this because there was a limit on how many textures you can use. I think it was 24 or something like this. I'll leave it here for now and I'll move it to the side where I want to sculpt a few details. We can use the multi-res modifier and subdivide it 1-2 times to get a higher density mesh for the sculpting mode. With the multi-res we can control and the levels for the different modes. We want to create a mask and here is the icon. I'll set a brush and adjust the things I need for the drawing. Let's flip the mask with Ctrl I and now I'll take out only what I want to inflate. To draw the things you want, no rush. Use the Ctrl key to switch the brush mode. I'll draw this pattern, something like an Asian Greek pattern, and I'm fine with it. Once we get it, we can use the inflate tool. That's what we have with the inflate tool, but we want to push it in So I'm holding the control key to deflate the things inside the mask. Don't push it too much, as the mesh from below can pop out on top. We can switch the mode to check what we have. Do what's left and let's smooth out everything. I'm holding shift for the smooth tool. And if it's too strong, you can adjust it from here. So something like that, so we can smooth out the edges a little bit. Come closer to see what we are doing. But don't play with it too much, as we will erase what you just did with the inflate tool. Jumping back to the object mode, and I think that's something we can stay with. I'll leave in the mask so we can tweak it later if we want to. We have the multi-res and we can just turn on and off the whole thing like it's modifier, just like that. One more thing I want to add to the face as a final detail. Right here I'll create something like a nostrils. Duplicate a few faces and get rid of the modifiers I don't need. Let's tweak the mesh. I'll use this to cut it out from the head. Only need some thickness with a solidify modifier. Remove the old materials and connect the one that left with the body. We can also cut out some parts from the Mohawk, just with a cube to do a few bites. We can do a final touch to the Dreamcatcher. Let's say we want to add a few more stones there, we can do that very easy. I'll grab that icosphere, lower the subdivisions and copy the location of this object. This menu is add-on that you can enable from preferences. We are still with the auto rotation, but for this we have to copy the rotation as well. Now we have the same rotation and we can use the local coordinates by double tapping the axis. We want to rotate it in the circle, so I'll add the area modifier. The empties have different rotation and I'll pick the one that is set for 8 counts. Now I only have to move this in edit mode along one of the axes, Y axis in this case. I'll put it somewhere here, and if it looks wrong, check if the scale is applied. That's how we can edit and add more stuff there. We can still add more elements to make it more interesting. A few more things I did before the final animation. I didn't record the process, but I want to show what is it and how you can do it. Starting with the Dreamcatcher, added icosphere in the center with subdivisions and animated using the displace modifier. I changed the coordinates from local to object and added the empty that control the animation. should be this empty. If we move it, you can see that it affects the texture coordinates, which is responsible for the animation. We can also rotate it to get different results, but I just offset the location a little bit. So that's what we have here. And I added some animation for the border using the shaders. In the center we have these tubes, 2 of them. If we isolate this one and get down to the data, we can see that this is just a curve with some depth. Bring the material, and this is where the animation happens. It's just a BSDF material with activated alpha channel, mix it with emission, using the UV coordinates, and that's how we can animate it with keyframes to the mappings, one at the beginning and one at the end of the animation. The other tube is the same but with different shader size and color, animated in the other direction. That's the Dreamcatcher, and I animated one more thing here, the feathers. Added a few modifiers to make them look like they are blown away by the wind. I had to convert them to mesh first, still keep a copy of everything non-destructive in the backup folder. But I convert them, then I joined all the parts of the feather with Ctrl J. The animation is happened with a simple deform modifier using the bending option. One for the X-axis and one for the Z-axis. I added the keyframes for the angle, then used the noise modifier in the graph editor to repeat the motion randomly. Same for the other axis, and play it with the settings here to get it right. So that was for the Dreamcatcher, and I did a few more things for the creature. Let's start top to bottom with antlers. We have this dots animation here. Go back to the shader editor and we can see that it's just the mappings on the Voronoi texture. I used the Z rotation. Others can be used too, but with the Z have this nice popping out effect of the dots. For the other antlers, I did something to the material only that I want to show you. So I added one more detail layer to the pattern, and it's very simple, using the same texture setup twice. So first we have this one, then duplicate it and reduce the scale. And I mix it with a mix color node. For the mixing, I'm using the noise texture. But what's important here is the color node. Usually we have black and white, but the pattern looks separated and we want to mix them better. So when we added a little bit of gray stones to the black and the white, it makes the transition between the two scales a little bit more interesting and realistic, having some of the small pattern popping in the big one. The eyes are also simple, animated with this blue emission pattern. If we go down to the shader tab, we can see that this is only a wave texture with a mapping animated. Here is what we have. And that's the whole setup. Added the emission there and used the mix color node to limit it only to the half of the eye, using the gradient texture. We also have a little bit of bump added there. For the horn, I also added more details or dirt where the horn is popping out from. This is what we have. I used again the mix color node and gradient texture to isolate the dirt only at the bottom. and plug it to the bump as well. Similar for the teeth, I added more contrast at the bottom of the curves. I'm using the gradient texture with the UV coordinates. That's how I make it darker there. That's the whole setup, still using the ambient occlusion node. Mix it with the color node, set to multiply. I wanted to make more bump details there, so I added the texture that I used for the horn. Gradient texture and mix color node to enhance where I want the details to be stronger. A few things I did to the comp as well. Let's start with the shading. So the metallic lines was too clean, and I added some of the bump effect of the other material there. Like you can see, it's just a little bit, but it looks much better on the close renders. For the animation, I tried to do it using the procedural texture and empty, but it didn't work it the way I want, so I had to create the animation texture. And I did it again in Blender using the wave texture. Here is the animation, which I did with a plane and the camera on top, nothing else. With the wave texture mappings animated, 10-second animation. Then I uploaded it to a displace modifier. Not only textures, you can also use clips and animations there. Let's also check this tube. Here I wanted to create something like liquid with some particles that moves into the body. Let me show you the wave pattern first. Animated using the mappings with the coordinates. Actually everything is animated like that, but I created several different sizes and speed for the particles. Played with the keyframes to add some variations. And basically that was everything I did. When it comes to the final animation, I'm using empties, pairing the camera, and in this case some of the lights to the empty and rotate it 360. I'm using the same technique for the other animations that you can see in this video, and here is how it works. We have to pair the camera and add the keyframes to the empty at the beginning, then to the end of the animation. Adjust the camera position to the final frames using the empty. You can move, rotate or scale the empty. Then add the other keyframe and we have very simple but still effective animation. For the final renders, I'm using the new HX View Transform with a punchy look. And the final renders I did with 128 samples and 0.01 noise threshold. Otherwise it had too much of these smudges that requires temporal denoising and so on. So with these settings and 200 resolution, which is 4K, the noise was not so bad. I exported in OpenEXR as I did some color grading in DAVINCI Resolve, but that's not a must as you can still use the PNGs. But if you want to push your project further, there is a very strong color grading tutorial by Gleb Alexandrov for Blender and DAVINCI workflow. The tutorial is available on Gumroad and it's a really nice thing to watch if you want to level up your color grading game. It's a free course, but you can always support the guys and donate some to help them create more tutorials like this. But still, if you are new to Blender, this course might be not for you, as there are many other things that you can learn first. But the course is out there, and if you want to find out more about the post-processing, this is the place. The course is free, the DaVinci Resolve is also free. It has paid studio version, but all the things you need are in the free version. But back to Blender, the easiest way is to render the things in PNG and combine the animation again in Blender later in the animation editor. Or you can go straight to the FFmpeg video option, which will create the whole video. Change the encoding to MPEG 4 and the output quality to perceptually lossless. Set the output file destination and hit Ctrl F12 for the final thing. I don't recommend this for the final animation, but I use the videos for some test results. If I want to render some fast animation to check to where it's going, I can hit the viewport render animation to render only screenshots of the viewport. Maybe put it to 50 or 75% so we can get a really fast thing to check. It can also be rendered in EV if you want a better quality but still fast renders. But usually for the final animation I'm using cycles in 2K or 4K. 4K is always better as you get a lot more details which are not visible in the 2K. It takes more time but the results are much better. Then if you scale it down to 2K, you still contain some of these fine details. But with all these things clear, we can complete the tutorial. If you're still here, I want to thank you for watching. I wanted to create something where I can put almost all of my knowledge with Blender, and I hope it was interesting and you learned a lot from it. More things to come on this channel, not sure if it's sooner or later, but I hope to see you there. So, until the next time.